Well, have you heard the news? The presumptive next president of the United States, the presumptive next leader of the world, has in fact promised that it's going to be a bloodbath if he is not elected. Surely, this is finally the thing that is going to disqualify him from being able to run. Finally, surely, we have conclusive proof that he is indeed an insurrectionist and he is trying to undermine democracy. So say all of the headlines. All of the NBC, CBS and Rolling Stone headlines are telling me that they were right all along when they said that this man really is a threat to democracy. But before we conclude that, we have to ask ourselves the question whether there is perhaps a little more to this story. And bringing us this story is our US correspondent, Julie Hartman. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Julie, what is going on in these headlines? What are we looking at here?
What's going on is typical American politics, Topher, especially with regard to Donald Trump. They have a strategy, which is basically just try to make Trump out to be a dictator at every possible turn, even if he didn't say something that was dictatorial or authoritarian at all. And we saw here that at a rally over the weekend, former President Donald Trump was actually talking about China and electric powered vehicles. And he was talking about supply chains and manufacturing of those vehicles. Honestly, the exact details of what he was talking about aren't necessarily important here. But what is important are that the details were about economics. He was talking about something pertaining to economic policy. And he was saying essentially, if I'm not elected and I don't enact these policies, he was talking about slapping on tariffs on China. He said, it's going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah.
But here we have the media taking that term and then saying that he's promising a bloodbath if he's not elected. Totally dishonest.
And in case anyone doubts Julie's analysis there, we've actually got the video, the bloodbath clip in context. It's going to run for over a minute, so bear with it, but you'll see the comments in context.
Mexico has taken over a period of 30 years, 34% of the automobile manufacturing business in our country. Think of it. Went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. Now, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. A friend of mine,
couldn't be clearer. He's talking about cars, manufacturing, economics. He's talking about China having access to the US market. He then talks about, if I get elected, I'll do this. If I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. He's talking about economics, and then he goes back to talking about cars. Julie, how come the media think they're going to get away with this in an age of social media and X and places where we can all share the original video with each other like that?
Well, frankly, Topher, despite those advantages of social media where you can actually see what happened, the media continues to do this because they've gotten away with it so many times. I mean, this goes back to when Donald Trump was running for president. They would pick anything he would say and take it out of context. When Donald Trump became president, they launched this Russia collusion hoax.
Sure.
Then the second time around, they had the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. This is their constant strategy. They lie in a way that helps them and makes the former president look bad and authoritarian. And then when it is exposed, they just kind of, let it go and move on. So the strategies worked for them. So of course they're going to continue to do it.
But this is the thing. The people writing those headlines must, at least some of them, must surely have seen the video. They must know that that's not an accurate, they're trashing their own brand. They're trashing their industry. What's it for?
Well, part of me believes that a lot of them are very much motivated by their own power, of course, and they know that many Americans will not double check, and that they can get
Sure.
away with a dishonest headline that makes Donald Trump look bad. But I think there's another component to this, which is that I think that many people believe that they are engaging in what's called a noble lie. That even though it's out of context, even though Donald Trump didn't really say that there would be a bloodbath if he didn't win, let's make it look that way, because then people won't vote for him, and it will save us from the greater evil and the greater moral catastrophe of him becoming president, which is far worse and will be far more destructive to the country than lying right now. And so I don't want to give them full credit on that, because I do think a lot of people are just very power hungry, and it's not for this noble purpose. But I do believe that there is a large segment of this population in the United States who really believes that Trump is like a Hitlerian figure, and that they have to do whatever they can, including lying, to save us from the disaster of his presidency. I think that is dangerous. It is incredibly dishonest. Trump is not a Hitler. He is, I think, the farthest thing from it. I will proudly vote for him in November, barring, at least right now, I plan to vote for him, barring an unforeseen circumstance. But this is what the country believes, that he is a Hitler, and we're just saving ourselves from his term if we lie.
Noble cause corruption. Putting aside that for a second, the choice of words isn't ideal. I'll acknowledge that. In the context of what he knows the media has said about him in the past, the choice of the word bloodbath is not ideal. It does seem to be really kind of giving them what they would be looking for. Do you think that Trump is choosing his words to actually play the media? I mean, it's correct. It's not a misuse of the language. Here's Merriam-Webster, a bloodbath being a major economic disaster. He's using the word correctly. Did he choose that word specifically to bait the media and to make them go through this again?
No, I don't. I mean, Ben Shapiro on his show recently played a clip, a montage of all of the different times that other reporters, Democrats, have used the term bloodbath. It is a common term. We can look up the definition. Yes, of course, it refers to bloodshed, but it also just refers to, a catastrophe. And so, no, I just think Donald Trump speaks the way normal people speak. Normal people use that term, and then the media, acted in bad faith.
One of the concerns that I had about Donald Trump before he became president the very first time, I wrote a blog post about him and stating what I thought he would be likely to do well and the concerns that I had. And one of the concerns that I had was his instinct towards protectionism. And that's what we see coming out here in his comments around Chinese-owned factories in Mexico making cheap cars and trying to flood them into the American market. His solution, as he's saying it there, is a 100% tariff, which tariffs, of course, are paid by the buyers. That's essentially increasing the cost of buying a car for Americans, with the idea, of course, that they would then buy an American-made car. Do you believe that this is actually going to be a good policy, and do you believe that this is the right thing to be using economic policy for what is essentially geopolitical purposes?
I think it is a good thing to punish China and to limit China. And as we have talked about on this program, Topher, China's infiltration and subversion campaign in the United States, and frankly, all around the world, is second to none. And it is terrifying, not just economically, but what they are doing as far as spying, what they are doing here in the United States as far as making and manufacturing the fentanyl, sending it to Latin American drug cartels who funnel it across our border. They buy farmland next to our military bases. They buy off our leaders. So I can understand where you're coming from economically. However, I do believe that China is a massive enough geopolitical threat that we have to do what we can to limit their infiltration.
Well, it seems that Donald Trump agrees with you, and we'll find out in November whether the American public are on the same page. Julie Hartman, North American correspondent, thank you as always for joining us here on the Aussie Wire.
Thank you, Topher.